repeat, you can't see shit cause you have closed your eyes. You say you'll listen, but you're missing what it's all about. Rise up now, if you never fall.
G'day guys, welcome back to my channel, Benji's POV, Point of View. I've been working over the last few weeks to try, or actually for the last month, last few weeks to try and put together a bit of a script of, the content that I wanted to do for today's episode. But I just had a very interesting experience down the street that has kind of really triggered me into action, and I've just been like, nah, now's the time to sit down and make this episode because this is getting absolutely ridiculous. And so what I want to talk about today is the power of the individual and what can you do? What can you do to save democracy and claim true freedom? And if you think that democracy is not completely eroded right now in our nation, then you don't understand what democracy is or what it was intended to be. If you look back, its origins, from ancient Greece in Athens, the administrative and judiciary arms, the judiciary and administrative arms of Parliament were made up by the common people. Those elected into those positions of judiciary positions and those elected into judiciary positions and those elected into administrative positions were from a pool of the common people, elected by the common people. And the assembly that gathered to discuss bills and laws and legislations that would be passed or not passed, all were welcome as long as they were of voting age, as long as they were of war age, and they weren't women or slaves or foreigners. So that, not so good. When I want to talk about reforming government, we need to learn from the mistakes of the past and also acclimate into that reformation what we have learnt throughout history. So, as far as I'm concerned, if you call yourself an Australian, you should be welcomed at that assembly to be able to discuss laws and bills and legislation. But the thing is that it has become this house of intellectual snobbery in which you need to be an elite academic who has done, 6 to 8 years of postgraduate study or tertiary study. You need to understand all of these legal and political words and this whole jargon that, when talking to a common Joe, they would have no idea what you're talking about because you're using words with 4 or 5 syllables in them, sitting there and talking to them about, I don't even have an example because I don't speak that language. I'm a common people. But that language is not necessary in order to be able to discuss whether or not a law is appropriate or not. And laws, democracy, the way I see it, is meant to be a political system that allows the people to decide what laws they want to be governed by and what laws they do not. Laws that are in place to protect the sanctity of life and to protect the sanctity of freedom of choice, I think are the only laws that deserve any kind of laws that are in place to protect the sanctity of life and to protect the sanctity of freedom of choice are the only laws that I think are the only laws that should be instituted, that should be governing us. Laws that are in place to protect a way of life, Like we could bring in the decriminalization of drugs, for example. You know, we're already seeing medicalized marijuana in a few states. You know, Monash University at the moment has been cleared to do a study to, you know, see the effects of psilocybin psychedelic mushrooms in the use of treating anxiety, depression and PTSD and, you know, disorders like mental health disorders like that. You know, but 20 years ago that would have been unthinkable because it was against the law, because that plant over there growing in your backyard, if you pick that out of the ground of your backyard and put it in your own body, we're gonna have to arrest you because that is illegal. What the fuck? What the fuck is that? Is absolute bullshit. Absolute bullshit. So I essentially wanted to have that bit of a rant because I'm starting to see this kind of like vaccination apartheid happening now. I watched a video by someone, I don't know who it was, I'd never heard of them before, you know, I'd never seen their channel, but they talked about a vaccination apartheid, and I was like, you know what, I definitely see that coming too. And it just happened. I was just in Cotton On, Pakenham, Central Marketplace, Cotton On. I have been a loyal customer of theirs. Almost every item of clothing that I own comes from Cotton On or Factory. I've loved their fashion. I wear it all the time. I've loved shopping there. I've always had a good experience there, and I was standing there with a shirt that I was ready to buy, that I wanted, that I was excited about, and I was told outright by the manager that they were not allowed to serve me and that I had to leave because I had no proof of vaccination. And I was like, are you serious? And she's like, yeah, it's the law, we have to. And I said to her, I'm a long time loyal and regular customer, and you won't let me buy this shirt because I don't have this card that says I've been vaccinated. Yeah, no, sorry, that's the law. So I tossed the shirt onto a pile of clothes and I said, you can be sure I won't be shopping here again then. And as I turned away, she was like, that's okay, we don't want to get sick. And I was like, if you've been vaccinated, then why the hell are you afraid of getting sick? Unless you don't believe that the vaccination plus the mask that you're wearing is going to protect you. Let's also not forget that government workers are the only people in Australia who are not mandated to be vaccinated. Government workers. But I don't want to talk about these singular issues, because these singular issues where people are protesting lockdowns or protesting the vaccination being mandatory or protesting masks or everything that's been protested over the last 2 years, these have all been singular issues that have been made possible by the biggest issue of all. And the biggest issue is that democracy is eroding in our nation. It is completely collapsing into an oligarchy, into totalitarianism. And like, you know, there's some big academic words for you, but essentially, like, if you don't know, totalitarianism, it's just a big fancy word for total control. Absolute total control. Sound like anyone in Parliament that we know right now? Dan Andrews, seeking, like, you know, like this bill I think is currently, it's gone through, as far as I am aware, it's passed through the lower house and is in the upper house at the moment, and opposition is trying to fight that. You know, but if that gets passed, let's just say that Dan Andrews has a truly altruistic heart and motive behind wanting to be able to be the sole person in Australia who gets to override the parliamentary process and override the Prime Minister himself and lock the nation down at a moment's notice whenever he sees fit. Let's just say that he's got a truly altruistic intention behind that. He's not going to be the Premier forever, so who can guarantee that the next Premier is going to come along and inherit those powers and not abuse them and misuse them? And this is what I'm talking about. The fundamental issue is that this safe house of intellectual snobbery where only the academically elite are allowed in the room to discuss bills and legislation leaves open these sorts of things to happen, where all of these loopholes are woven in, and, you know, it ends up just turning into, like, you know, a classic case of, you know, loopholes with legislation and what have you, is when, you know, big slap in the face for Australia, mind you, when within a month or two of Ireland holding a referendum for marriage equality, Australia decided that we would have a postal vote. Now, for those of you who don't know, a referendum, like, they're both the same. The entire nation votes on a particular issue, but with a referendum, the results of the referendum change the constitution and change the law like that. The results of the postal vote, however, don't do that. It's basically just a, let's see the numbers, and then we'll decide whether or not we want to change the law. So it was a big slap in the face there. But, you know, seeing as how I think it was by 67% that we won, so a pretty big landslide. So had they not have, you know, allowed marriage equality in Australia, then there would have been uprisings like you would not believe. But classic example of a loophole is that all of the religious fundamentalists jumped up and down and they were like, well, what about our religious rights? We should have the right to not be able to marry people that we believe should not be married. And all of a sudden, like, you know, that bill was passed, and now, like, queer people are kind of back in a very similar position where, you know, there are churches out there that may marry us if they're progressive, and there are more and more of them coming out, but by and large, capital C church, capital C Catholic, all-encompassing church, they've decided that they don't want to marry queer people, and so they've fought for their, you know, religious freedoms to be protected in that way. And there's that loophole that has put queer people back in the same position where essentially we can get civil unions again. It's just called a marriage now. You know, like, and, you know, it's, I mean, like, I'm you know, oversimplifying it a little bit there, but I mean, like, that is just one example in which these loopholes are left wide open for people to abuse power or misuse the legislative process, you know, to push personal agenda. You know, like, all politics has become identity politics. All politics has become identity politics. It's ridiculous. So what's the point of me ranting about this? Like, you know, I said that, you know, today's episode was going to be about the power of the individual and what can you do to save democracy and claim true freedom. Well, like, I've been talking to I've been talking to a couple of people about this, you know, and trying to come up with some ideas. And I mean, like, you know, there's, like, one idea that my mate Ash had, actually, Ash Krings, great guy. You know, he was like, instead of everyone standing outside of Parliament House and shouting, like, you know, sack Dan Andrews, or, like, you know, fuck off with the vaccination and all of that shit, how about we get, like, you know, as many people as we can, like, talking, like, 10,000 plus, if possible, people who were on board to recognise that we needed major reform within the government, within the core government, a reform that allowed the common people to be a part of the legislative and parliamentary process without it, like, excluding people who don't belong to the highly educated and elite. Like, how about we all just sit down in the city square and meditate or sing or chant, like, you know, sing songs of freedom, and we just sit there and meditate in silence, in silent protest. Then what are the militarized police going to do? They're going to come along and be like, oi, you sitting down there, like, you're resisting arrest, so we're just going to fucking slam you up and slam you on the ground, but, you know, you don't fight back. Non-violent protests and non-violent revolutions are the ones that have been the most successful. Just look at the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King Jr. was not violent. He didn't incite violence. Violence was incited against them, and oftentimes people would fight back when they were getting really brutally beaten, but oftentimes they wouldn't. They would just take the beating because they were afraid of further legal ramifications if they did. Thinking of different ways to protest rather than just shouting about small issues and marching and just shouting and all of that stuff. Why not actually make a real statement? Just sit down cross-legged in silence, or sit down cross-legged and just sing a song of freedom. Saying that we want our nation to be free again, that we are free people and we choose freedom and we are taking back our freedom. Another idea, is a music festival of some kind, of the likes of Woodstock. That Woodstock and is probably the most well known, but Woodstock and festivals like it at the time have had a lasting impact on culture, and the ripple effects of those festivals can be felt today. Those festivals happened during the free love movement, when people started to become more sexually awakened and sexually progressive, when they started to become more open to recreational drug use marijuana and psychedelics, expanding their mind and consciousness and their thinking. And that can be felt today. The positive effects can be felt today because, although homophobia, transphobia and biphobia still exist, it's a much quieter buzz, and you stand a much better chance of actually winning any kind of criminal case if you have been criminally discriminated against because of your sexual orientation or because of your sexual orientation or your belonging to the queer community. So we can still feel the ripple effects of that countercultural movement, and I think the psychedelic community could really, really do something big about this, rather than having just, a festival of doof music. Let's have a festival where we've got bands and artists coming together who agree that democracy is being robbed and stolen from us and being left in complete tatters. Let's have people come along and sing about freedom, and sing in a way that empowers us to fight for our freedom. That the music festival not just be a festival of festivities and fun and music, but actually a political statement. Overtake the MCG and have the festival there, AFL is basically a religion in and of itself here in Melbourne anyway, and making MCG the AFL Mecca. So let's overtake that and hold a music festival there and, make a political statement, just shake the earth and sing and cry out for freedom to be reclaimed, true freedom. Because the thing is that if your freedoms can be taken away from you, then as Alan Watts once said, they're not freedoms, they're privileges. And they're only being afforded to you provided that you obey the oligarchy. Another term, oligarchy and totalitarianism, can be used intermittently. Basically the same thing, a government that has assumed total control. That's basically just what I wanted to say. On that, I think that we need to start collaborating with people, that we need to start casting wider visions and not focusing on the smaller issues, but focusing on the bigger issue that allows these smaller issues to exist in the first place. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below in the comment section. I'll do my best to interact with them. I really want to build the audience here, and I really want to play my part in seeing change in our nation. I know I am not the only person that is not okay with the complete and utter breakdown of democracy. I know I'm not the only person okay with the fact that the government has essentially said, apart from us government workers, and you can look this up on legalaid.org.com.au, all but those who are government workers and judiciary workers are mandated to be vaccinated. But if you work for the government, then you are not mandated to be vaccinated for any reason. You can opt to not be vaccinated if you are a government worker. Does that not strike you as concerning in the least? And even if the vaccine is safe, like, I don't want to get into that. It's not my place to get into that. I am not a medical expert. But the fact that it's being mandated and that our rights, our freedoms are being withheld from us, where there's an apartheid culture where you can't even walk into a shop and buy a shirt. I experienced it just 20 minutes into this. Experienced this about just half an hour ago. I was at the shops and I couldn't buy a shirt. I couldn't buy a shirt because I didn't have a card saying that I had been vaccinated, and I was kicked out of the store. And this is happening in cafes and other retail places all over the place. It's not happening in supermarkets yet, thank God, because what would happen if our access to food was denied unless we were vaccinated? Like, whether or not you agree that the vaccination is a good idea or not, or is safe or not, is irrelevant. It's irrelevant. That is the smaller issue here. That's a small issue that I'm kind of considering a non-issue, because the bigger issue here is the medical coercion on the part of the government. The bigger issue here is that the government has become this totalitarian, tyrant, dictatorial ruler who is laying down these decrees and forcing us through coercion and through the withholding of our freedoms in order to force us to submit and surrender. That is not freedom. So if you agree that that's not freedom, then please, drop a comment. Let's talk about it. I want to start conversations with people who also have a platform, on YouTube or other platforms. I want to collaborate with people. I want to get together with people and sit around a table and start talking about, like, how can we be smart about actually seeing our nation return to a truly free nation? What would it look like if every 6 to 12 months, as long as you were 18 years old and called yourself an Australian, you could walk into the Legislative Assembly and participate in conversations about whichever bills were getting discussed and proposed at the time, and no snobbery-like academic language is used, but it's all broken down and spoken in the vernacular so that everyone can understand what is being discussed, and everyone gets to have a say. Everyone gets to have put in their input, put in their 2 cents, because that's what democracy looked like in Athens. That's what democracy was supposed to look like. And now it's reserved for the all-powerful, who are seeking even more power with each and every day. And it is scary. And there are things that we can do, practical things that we can do to reclaim our freedom. But it all comes down to whether or not you have the courage to stand up, to speak out, and to risk losing these illusory freedoms that are actually privileges afforded us, provided we are obeying. Because if we can push through that, if we can fight hard enough and push through potentially losing these freedoms, and eventually see the current government completely just be deconstructed and pulled down and set aside, and to have the nation hold a free election where we just elect common people who we, through conversation and through networking have decided have the leadership skills and qualities that we want, people who we know will listen to people who we know will listen to us and take into account what we're saying. Something has to be done. Something has to be done. And I'm ready to fight. So if you are too, drop a comment. Let's talk. That's it for today. Have a good one.